I want to welcome you all and to introduce to you Father Tom Weston, a Jesuit of the California province who's been active in the world of 12-step recovery since 1976. He addresses issues for individuals and families who are in crisis because of alcoholism and addiction. He currently resides in Oakland. And a little minor factoid. At the turn of the last century, 1900, his grandfather, an Irish immigrant, worked at Stanford University as one of the gardeners and groundkeepers, and he held that position for 40 years. So you might say this is one of the fruit from Stanford soil. So we welcome Father Tom for his talk, How to Live Surrounded by Crazy People, a Strategy for Evolution and Sanity. So I want to welcome Father Tom.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. My grandfather did work here forever. I'm a little boy when he dies, and he's buried over at Holy Cross Cemetery here in Menlo Park, and they had a house in Menlo Park that I think about 10 years ago sold for $1 trillion. But when they lived there, it was not a $1 trillion house, I assure you. And we had a beer stein from the Stanford 1904 something or other, which I used to put cigarette butts in when I was a high school kid to hide them from my mother. So, and then my nephew went through Stanford and met his wife here, and we're married at Stanford. So although I don't have a lot of personal connections, it's in the DNA, and I'm glad to be back. When I was a high school boy, I went to school in San Jose, and we'd come here and run cross country. And I don't know if they still do that. Here at Stanford and at Los Gatos High School, those were our two basic courses. And then I decided to smoke instead, so I stopped that and developed a dandy tobacco habit for a long time. Anyway, welcome here, and I want to talk about stresses and strains and how to handle some of that, and out of my own experience. And if there's anything I say that's helpful, please use it. And if it's not helpful, don't worry about it. In my family, we had the usual stresses and strains. On one side of the family, we had Irish Catholic Democrats, and on the other side of the family, we had Swedish Lutheran Republicans. So there were topics that you didn't really want to mention. But after a couple of social drinks, things got mentioned. And I remember, I wasn't born yet, I'm born in 1947, but in 1943, there was a barbecue in San Jose over Mother's Day weekend, and somebody criticized President Roosevelt. And my father, who was a patriot, said, "You do not criticize the President of the United States in wartime. Tell that to a drunk, and they will criticize more loudly." And that proceeded to happen. Huge fight, people shoved down, divorce, excommunication, people being banned from sorts of places. That was 1943. I'm born in 1947. In 1965, there was a family reunion for the first time since that 1943 experience. And there was a whole group of relatives coming up the walkway that I had never met. And my mother turned to me and said, "Act like nothing happened." Now, what I've discovered over the years is pretending things haven't happened does not help stress. It's really helpful to be able to talk about stuff when stuff is going on. We had alcoholism all over the family, of course. That's a lot of my primary work is with alcoholics and addicts. I'm an alcoholic myself. I've been sober since 1976, I guess. Gerald Ford was president. One of the things I used to deal with stress, of course, was alcohol. It was very available and very easy, and it sure helped me in studies. I was in the Jesuit community, and we had to study philosophy and read Thomas Aquinas. No offense, sweet Dominicans, but we had to read Thomas Aquinas, and who cares? But you had to keep doing it and reading all these other people and write papers, and it was just awful. And the salvation for me was that in the common room of the Jesuit students' dorm, they put a 15-gallon keg of beer every Friday afternoon. And I just lived down the hall. So whenever I felt a little stressed, I would go and have another beer, and this continued for quite a while. And I barely got through school. I got sober in 1976 when I was studying theology at Berkeley. And I had never written papers, studied, done academic work without a drink. And I felt terribly impaired. I don't know how to write without a drink. I don't know how to have a conversation without a drink. And it took a while. Again, that last year was not academically all that successful. What I had to learn how to do was develop other ways of dealing with stress, and other ways of dealing with tension, and other ways of dealing with conflict other than drink about it, smoke dope about it, or don't talk about it. So out of all of that experience, I'd like to share a couple of things with you this evening. I taught high school in Los Angeles for 100 years, and so I have some handouts to give you. They wanted to know if I had PowerPoint and so forth. I'm not one of the high-tech kinds of people. But I do have a couple of handouts that I hope you find helpful. Let's see. Family dynamics, school dynamics. We are surrounded by crazy people. There's all kinds of people who have stuff going on, causes and issues. I was sober a couple of years, and I started going to another 12-step group called Al-Anon. And Al-Anon is for families and friends of alcoholics. Most of my friends could use a little Al-Anon. And I find 100,000 Al-Anon meetings take the edge off. It just kind of gets me to relax a little bit. And one of the things they do in a lot of the 12-step programs, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, is they say the serenity prayer, and that's not a bad prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, I, for years, thought that prayer basically meant, give me serenity, period. And there's a spiritual principle there. I need some serenity. I'm surrounded by crazy people. They're arguing in my family over political things. That probably doesn't happen in your family. I have a brother that likes Glenn Beck, and I have a brother that likes Dennis Kucinich, and they don't agree on anything, and they'll snipe at each other a lot. And then I, as the peacekeeper, am called in to stand in the middle, and I end up covered with bullets, and I don't want to do it anymore. Serenity, serenity, I need some serenity. It's not a good idea to make decisions when I'm real high. It's not a good idea to make decisions when I'm really low. I don't want to make decisions when I'm upset. If I've just been in an argument, I might not be in the right mood for decision making, so I need a centered place. I need a peaceful place. God, give me some serenity. God, give me some breathing room, because there's some stuff I can't change. And there's some stuff I can change, and I need to know what's what. I was at a AA meeting in Dallas, Texas, and this fellow said, here are 3 things I cannot change. I cannot change the past, and I cannot change the truth, and I cannot change you. Well, that frees up the whole day, if you think about it. I can't tell you How often I've tried to change my family. If only they did this, if only they did that. Giving little bits of advice. Never worked, never worked, never worked. Can't change the past, can't change it. What can I change? I can change my thinking. I can change my behavior. And I can change my attitudes. That's what I can change. Now, none of that's easy. And little bits are really good places to start. There's if you're completely stressed out and crazed and feel like you are, on the edge, it's time to breathe. It's time to take a rest. It's time to get a little bit of serenity because I need to make some decisions. Now, one of the first things I heard in the Al-Anon meeting was I want to learn how to act rather than react. Act rather than react. I'm a reactor. You come at me with anger, I respond with anger. You come at me with fear, I respond with fear. You be snarky to me, I can respond with snark. And I'm like a yo-yo. I'm just being played. I want to be in a centered place so I can make some decisions. One of my mentors in dealing with crazy families was a woman out of Texas named Blanche. And Blanche said, in Al-Anon, we learn how to keep our sails out of other people's wind. There's a lot of wind blowing out there. And some of it is just none of my business. And some of it I might want to get involved in, but those are decisions I get to make. Other people don't necessarily get to make them for me. I mentioned my mom saying, act like nothing happened. She was a great worrier. She thought that worry was love. If you're worried enough, you're close. What I discovered is worry just kills. It just wears you out. I don't have the time to worry. But if you look at a crazy system, a crazy organization, a crazy family, a lot of the dysfunction is tolerated because 3 rules are followed. Claudia Black writes about this in a remarkable little book called It Will Never Happen to Me. She is the middle child, alcoholic home. Mom and dad were alcoholic, and she said they lived across the street from the bar, and her parents were in the bar a lot. And she grows up to be a social scientist and an observer and a therapist. So she, as a little girl, would sit and watch the bar, waiting for mom and dad. And she'd see people go into the bar by themselves and come out with someone else. She thought that was interesting. She saw people go into the bar in pairs and come out with different pairs. She thought that was interesting. She saw people going into the bar in a pair and coming out by themselves. That was very interesting. What's going on? So she reflects and she thinks, and she doesn't want to become an alcoholic, but she does. It did happen to her. And she gets sober and she gets back on her feet and she starts developing some other ways of dealing with stress other than the bottle. And then she looks at the family dynamics. Crazy things can happen in an alcoholic family. Crazy things can happen if there's people off-center in the family. She said on one occasion she was home, she was there with her boyfriend. She was about 13 years old, and they were watching TV, and her brother and sister were all in the room, and all of a sudden there was, remember the bars across the street, there's a knock on the door. Knock, 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 knock. And she gets up and goes to the door, and there's a very agitated man there who says to her, do you have any deodorant? Just a minute. She goes to the bathroom, gets some deodorant, hands it to him, psh, psh, gives it back. He says, thank you, and he leaves. She goes back to the bathroom. She puts the deodorant down. She comes and sits next to her boyfriend, and he says to her, who was that? And she said, who was who? If you're used to crazy, you don't notice crazy. It's just perfectly normal. And if we focus on the crazy, we'll lose our minds. So the first rule for keeping the group ill is don't talk. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about the weirdness. We're not going to talk about the alcoholism. We're not going to talk about depression. We're not going to talk about cancer. We're not going to talk about mental illness. We're not going to talk about abuse. We don't talk about it. What we'll talk about is, aren't these peas delicious? That's a safe topic. Or do we need rain? Oh, we need rain. We can talk about that too. But there are certain things we just don't talk about. Rule 2. Don't trust. You can't trust anybody. If people know what you're really thinking or feeling, they'll hurt you. They'll betray your confidence. You're in this by yourself. Don't trust anyone. Today's confidence becomes tomorrow's ammunition, and who needs that? So you learn to keep your cards close to your chest. Don't talk, don't trust. And the third thing is don't feel. Because you don't want to feel lousy. And there's a little depression in the family anyway. And one of the reasons I loved alcohol was it sedated me. And if I was sedated enough, I didn't have to feel anything. What a relief. But that means you don't feel joy, and you don't feel glad, and you don't feel sad, and you don't feel angry, and you don't feel fear. How are you? Just fine, thanks. And there's kind of that smile. You see it in some family photographs at my house. So, to begin getting well, to begin getting out of the trap, you gotta start talking about stuff. Some of us do this with a therapist. First time we've ever talked. I went to a therapist when I was a senior in college. I was up at Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington, reading Thomas Aquinas and drinking beer. And I saw a therapist for depression. I'm so depressed. He said, do you drink? I said, not much. Then we talked about my parents. And we concluded that the reason I was depressed was that I was in Spokane. And that was the reason I was depressed. I was sober for a year or 2 or 3 before I realized this. If you take large amounts of depressants on a daily basis for years, you will get depressed. I know that's subtle. I completely missed it for years. But when I was no longer drinking or smoking a little non-habit form of marijuana, we did it for about 10 years, you don't feel. Stop taking the depressant and the feelings start coming up. And I go through a period, I got sober when I was 29, I'm almost 67, but for a period of time, it was very anxiety-producing for me because I was starting to have feelings, and I concluded I was losing my mind. No, I was just having feelings. It took a long time to get used to that, but feelings come and feelings go. And we can talk about it. I'm really angry. I'm really sad. I'm really tired. It's good to talk about it. Don't talk, don't trust. You find there are some people you can trust. There are some teachers you can trust. There may even be members of your family you can trust. In my family, we had my father's sister, Mary. She was safe. She was safe. Everyone else was a little rigid, but Mary, you could talk to. And there were some other adults around who were very, very safe for us as kids. My own parents I couldn't deal with, but as a kid, the parents of some of my friends, I talked about everything with them. And that really helped me as a teenager. I could have used them around when I was in my 20s too. I got very isolated. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Now, one of my teachers is a priest in Los Angeles named Terry. And I heard him say this. one of the reasons we're under a lot of stress, and one of the reasons a lot of us just feel so much pressure, is we follow the 5 rules of the world. Our society, our culture runs on 5 rules, and they're killers. Rule number 1, you cannot have anything wrong with you. Fit in, look good, conform, don't be weird. What will people say? You can't have anything wrong with you. In 1972, presidential election, Mr. Nixon and Mr. Agnew were running for re-election, and George McGovern was running, and his first vice presidential choice was a guy named Senator Thomas Eagleton from Missouri. The campaign began, and you know how campaigns are. They're nasty and they're awful. Someone found out that Senator Eagleton went into an institution for a while to be treated for depression. And he was hospitalized for a while, and then came out of the hospital, and he's okay now. Well, when the word came out that he went into the hospital for depression, the whole country screamed and shouted, and he had to resign from the ticket. The only one of the 4 who had a certificate from a doctor saying he was okay had to resign from the ticket. Nixon and Agnew were just fine, you can't have anything wrong with you. What will people say? Rule 2. If you have something wrong with you, get over it fast. This is where we think we're so big-hearted. You're a little depressed, your mother died. Take the weekend off. Come back. Shape it. We'll give you a little bit of breathing room. Get over it fast. And culturally, we like fast. In fact, that's one of the things that makes us crazy. Everything moves so fast all the time. You can't have anything wrong with you. If you have something wrong with you, get over it fast. Rule 3. If you won't get over it fast, pretend you did. Lie. How are things? Great. Just great. Doing really well, planning on hanging myself later on tonight, but aren't these peas delicious, You just cover up. Rule 4. If you won't pretend, drop out. And a lot of people do. A lot of people drop out. They don't vote, they don't participate, they go to work, they go home, they watch TV. But they don't get involved in much. My suspicion is if you're here on a Tuesday night at a talk like this, you're not the kind of person that drops out. You follow Rule 5. And Rule 5 says, if you won't drop out, at least have the decency to look ashamed when you're around the rest of us. So you'd come into a group like this and say, hello, my name is Tom, and I'm so sorry. I'm just so ashamed. My grades aren't good enough. I'm the wrong weight. I'm the wrong height. I'm the wrong color. I'm from the wrong part of town. I just don't fit in anywhere. But if I stay in the back and don't take up much room, will you let me stay? Those rules kill people. In the wonderful world of recovery, drug addicts, alcoholics, gamblers, sociopaths, what we discovered is if we're going to survive, we have to break the 5 rules. Like the first rule that says you can't have anything wrong with you. We say, listen, if you don't have something seriously wrong with you, we're not interested. No. Just out of jail, great, we're looking for a treasurer. You're in charge of the money. We figure you'll know things, Of course you're depressed. Of course you've been to jail. Of course you've done stupid things. So have we all. We're glad to see you. That's breaking rule number 1. Rule number 2, you don't have to get over it fast. You don't get over stuff fast. I've always had a little problem with authority figures. And it looks like I will continue having a little problem with authority figures. Some of the stuff is just our stuff. Bad attitude, bad mouth. I've learned how to improve by changing some of my behavior. But that's taken years. Rule 3, you don't have to pretend. This is not a place for pretense. You get to be real here. You don't have to drop out, and you don't have to be ashamed. You don't have to be ashamed. We're time for handout number 1.
Okay, which one's?
This handout is the one from Gerald May entitled Simply Sane. Now, I'm a reader.
Darling,
All right, come on. This is such a helpful person. I went to a meeting, a men's group, and we're all from families that have a bit of exotic behind them. Either we're from alcoholic parents, or we get married to alcoholics, or we have alcoholic children. So there's some tension in the family. I've never wanted to marry an alcoholic, but my parents. Anyway, that's not the point. We were talking one night about stuff. And the first guy who shared said that when he was a little boy, he'd run away from home a lot. Well, the next guy talked about running away from home a lot. And the next guy talked about running away from home a lot. And I felt very odd because I didn't run away from home a lot. I discovered books. And I was able to leave the house without walking out the front door. I could open a book and go anywhere. And so I'm one of those people who I'm a reader. And if I have a couple of books, I am not anxious. If I don't have books, I get very anxious. And one of my friends said, you could go to therapy for that. And I said, I'd rather just buy another book. So that's what I do. One of the books I read, and it's one of the best books I've ever read about life and being alive, is by some thoughts from Gerald May, MD. Gerald May passed a few years ago. He was a physician, very friendly to the world of recovery, and he wrote a book in 1976 called Simply Sane, The Spirituality of Mental Health. Mental health. And here's a couple things he said. For some peace of mind. Number 1, accept your craziness. Completely. A lot of us have weird little stuff. Funny interests or... For instance, I live with a group of Jesuits in Oakland, and one of the brothers never reads the San Francisco paper. Never! It's odd. He'll read the Oakland Tribune. One of the other brothers only reads the New York Times. Never reads the Tribune or the Chronicle. I read all 3. Now, who do you think is the better of the 3? Well, of course, me, because I read them all. But we all have our funny little quirks. Funny stuff around food, funny stuff around exercise, funny things about what's comfortable, what's not comfortable. You sleep on your side, you sleep on your... A lot of us have goofy little things and interests. I love a good serial killer book. Well, that's not very spiritually uplifting. I think they're great. Accept your craziness completely. Number 2, accept your dissatisfaction with being crazy completely, because we should be so much better by now. You're a student at Stanford, for God's sake. Shape up. Okay, that'll work. 3, accept your attempts to do something about it completely, because we get dissatisfied and we start going to the gym and running and being vegetarian for a while. It doesn't last. 4, accept your inability to accept whatever you cannot accept completely. You get to be a little odd. It's such a relief. People will think you're odd, Tom. No doubt about it. Self-acceptance is freedom. Self-acceptance is freedom. God has the skills to work with me as I am. If I'm pretending to be someone else, it's harder for God to do God's work. More on that later. Part of being alive and part of dealing with crazy people is to have some kind of prayer life. It's really helpful to ask God for help. It's really helpful to have some time of quiet. It's really helpful to have some time of meditation. And there are lots of ways to do that, and you have to find your own ways. I've been finding my own ways for years and years and years. And what will help you here, you'll have to change later on. I remember doing a lot of yoga in Spokane, and I remembered on one occasion, I did yoga on the roof of this 4-story building, and I was drinking a little. I kept on thinking of jumping off the roof. And I said, I don't think I'm going to mention this to anyone. And I think I'll stop doing yoga on the roof. That's why I stopped doing yoga on the roof. And I couldn't tell anyone. They'll lock you up if you're thinking of jumping off the roof while doing yoga. Prayer. If you do pray, breathing, Tai Chi, the Rosary, the Eucharist, reading Scripture, chanting the Psalms. If you do pray, Dr. May says, pray. Do it. Do the best you can. Accept the whole situation. Watch with awe. Observe your own behavior. Watch with awe. In Luke's Gospel and frequently in Mark, whenever the Spirit is present, the people respond with awe or amazement. If you've got any awe or amazement in you, treasure it. Number 2, if you don't pray, and some of us don't, we're busy, we're not sure it works, we're too practical. If you don't pray, do the best you can. Accept the whole situation. Watch with awe. You can still observe. You can still be awake. If you can't pray, and sometimes you can't. One of my friends suicided. Oh, this is 20 years ago. Smart, interesting, New Yorker, hilarious. Turned 50, broke up with her boyfriend, put on 100 pounds, shot herself. Relapsed with alcohol. It took me about a year and a half to be able to pray again with any kind of glad to be here. Sometimes if you're real mad, you can't pray. Sometimes if you're real tired, you can't pray. Sometimes if you're real sad, you can't pray. If you can't pray, number 1, do the best you can. Accept the whole situation. Watch with awe. Be still and listen. In the New Testament, regularly there's conversation about seeing, you know. Lord, that I may see. Lord, help me see. Lord, help me believe. There's also a lot of conversation in the Jewish scriptures and the Christian scriptures and in the Quran about listening. Listen. You know, the great prayer of Israel, Shema Israel. Listen, Israel. And please speak, let me listen. Waiting. Now, I'm not a patient person. Carrie Fisher is, she was Princess Leia in Star Wars. And she said, instant gratification takes too long. And I relate to that. I want it here, and I want it now, and I want it fast, and I'd like some more. So that's how I get out of bed in the morning. So Dr. May writes this. He says about waiting. Practice the deep, quiet art of waiting. I try to remember this when I'm in Safeway. You know? 9 people ahead of me. The deep, quiet art of waiting. Also on planes. I've been to Japan a couple times, and the Japanese, they are so civilized. They know how to get on a plane and how to get off a plane fast. They can do subways perfectly. I like that. I was in Osaka recently, and I had to get a plane to, a train to Tokyo, and I was going to be late, and I went to and the guy said, listen, a train leaves every 6 minutes. It's going to be okay. Every 6 minutes? Tokyo, 2.5 hours later. I was on a plane coming from somewhere to somewhere, and if we didn't get off the ground fast, the ice would form on the wings, and then we'd have to de-ice the plane again. And I got right on, and I sat down, and then the Americans come on the plane. Oh, I'm going to block the aisle, and I'm going to see if I really want to book. And well, I think I'll stop and block. And there's 100 people behind them. And I want to strike them dead. Practice the deep, quiet art of waiting. Oh. In making decisions, if a direction seems right, follow it. But if nothing seems right, wait. Wait for rightness. If there's not time to wait, move ahead to do whatever is the best you can do, then wait. Take the time. And in living, do not rush your sanity. I want to do so much better now. Take some time. Major coronary. 3 days later, I think I'd like to start dating. Maybe not, you know. How about waiting a little while before you start dating? Like maybe a year. Well, I'd like to get done now. Yeah. Do not rush your sanity. Do the best you can, then wait. We're surrounded by crazy people. I go online and I get so outraged and offended by stupidity. I'm surrounded by fools. And I was taught this very early without alcohol and drugs. How can you begin to give yourself a chance to grow and develop and live? They said, halt. You don't want to get too hungry. You don't want to get too angry. You don't want to get too lonely. And you don't want to get too tired. Everybody gets a little hungry and a little angry and a little lonely and a little tired. That's pretty normal stuff. And it's great if you can be awake to it, and it's great if you can talk about it with a couple other people instead of being out there the Lone Ranger self-diagnosing. I believed if I was hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, I was a saint. And you're not. You're pathetic. So in my 30s, what I started noticing was if I'm too hungry, too angry, too lonely, and too tired, I'm off balance. I'm overreacting to stuff. I am not responding well. Well, I'm tough, I'm strong like bull. I can be too hungry and too angry, no problem. I can be too hungry, too angry, and too lonely, no problem. Well, with all four, well, then I better do something. I discovered in my 40s, 50s, and 60s, any one of them makes me dangerous and stupid. And so I have to watch, am I eating? Anger, I get angry. I mentioned this to some people in Los Angeles, and they said, if you were really spiritual, you would never get angry. And I said, that's so helpful. I get mad. I need to know what's happening when I'm mad. I remember when 9/11 happened, and we were under attack, and everyone was upset, and I was mad. It took me a couple of days to know what I was feeling, but I was mad. And I had to do something with the anger. And I've never been able to pray anger away. Oh, dear God, take away life. That doesn't work for me. I've got to go and do something physical. And my grandfather, the gardener, I go work in the yard, chop things, cut things, plant things. And I turned Rush Limbaugh on. Rush is always mad. And I thought if I could listen to someone angry, it would help me get out some of my anger. So I'm pulling weeds and doing this and doing that. Matter and matter and matter. And then we had a rose bush, a tree rose, that was pathetic. It wasn't flourishing. And I had talked to it over the last couple of years. And it still wasn't flourishing. And I remember yanking it out by its roots and leaving it there as a warning to the others. Well, by 6 o'clock, I was done. I mean, I had... And so I went and watched PBS. Sister Wendy was doing a tour of the LA Museum of Modern Art. And I felt culture and civilization, and I was very grateful to Sister Wendy. Hungry, watch what you eat. Watch when you eat. I can get into real stupid habits over food. Lonely. It's a lot of us, sometimes we're lonely in crowds. We feel so awkward. What do you do with your hands? What do you talk about? When I was drinking, you know, what's friendship mean? A friend is someone who brings more beer. That's who a friend is. But if you're not drinking beer, how do you develop friends? And it takes time. And intimacy takes time. And friendship takes time. And we get to be able to talk about some things that maybe we can't talk about at home. How does this work for you? How does that work for you? The loneliness stuff can be very real. And tired. I don't have a thing in me that says, oh, Tom, you're done now, lie down. I don't have anything like that. I keep going. And this gets me into big trouble. Because I get not just tired, but fatigued. And then not just fatigued, but exhausted. And I don't even know I'm exhausted. All I notice is there is no God, and you're in my way. That's what I notice. And sometimes I don't know how exhausted I am until I just realize I have no faith, and I have no hope, and I have no charity. This is exhaustion. And I need to do something to rest. I know you're in the middle of school and you can't rest until you're 35, but rest as soon as you can. You know, that's what I would recommend. We used to have Sabbath days, and we don't do those anymore. You know, where you take Sunday off or Saturday off or Friday off, depending on your group. And now we just stay busy all the time. And I have to watch the busy. I need to take downtime. I need to rest. I need to take time off. I need to go on an occasional retreat. Get out of the rut, rest, and ask God for help. I met a remarkable woman a few years ago by the name of Susan B. Anthony. She was the grandniece of the Susan B. Anthony. And she was an older lady when I met her. She was a sober alcoholic and got sober the year I was born, 1947. And she was a socialite in New York, very politically active, called before the House on Un-American Activities Committee and refused to go. So she got into political trouble with people. She got a doctorate in theology at Notre Dame University in Indiana. One of my friends calls it Our Lady's School, Notre Dame. She became a therapist and lived in Florida. Anyway, she'd give some wonderful talks. And she'd been around a lot. And I got to drive her to the airport. She gave a weekend retreat at the Jesuit place in Los Altos over here. I got to drive her to the airport, which means I was special. She's written a couple of books. And one of the things she said was this, most of us are bright. That's not our problem. Most of us know a lot. That's not our problem either. Our problem is we don't remember to remember. We don't remember to get enough sleep. We don't remember to ask God for help. We don't remember to take time to be with some friends. We don't remember to do something that's just fun. We don't remember to pray. We're just so busy, and everyone else is too. And then we wonder why we feel trapped. The first step of the 12-step program says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, narcotics, gambling. There's a long list. But the powerlessness, and life is a mess, and is there any way out? And there's a power greater than ourselves, and I'm going to ask God for help. I'm going to ask God for help. And it sounds so hokey. Do I have to do it on my knees? No. Do I need to burn a candle? No. Should I be in church? No. You can just ask for help. And I try to remember to do that throughout the day. Dr. May, he's written several other books. He wrote a book called Addiction and Grace, and he's written a few others. He's very, very fine. Dr. May says in terms of prayer and meditation, it's so important to do that if you're so busy you have no time for it, do 5 minutes a day. Well, I need an hour or nothing. Do a little bit will help. 2 minutes here, 3 minutes here. And sometimes it's just, oh God, help me. If you're praying, oh God, strike them dead, you might want to change your prayer. Because that's not always a helpful prayer. But I understand it. I understand it, especially in waiting in line. Next page. This page is about part of asking God for help, okay? This is something I have found useful. It's to help our awareness and our consciousness and our connection with God as we understand God. And a lot of us just get too busy. We just get too busy. In the religious communities, regularly we're asked to examine our consciences, supposing we have a conscience. When I was in philosophy, one of my classmates gave me, you have to know a little bit of Walt Disney mythology, but there's Pinocchio and Geppetto and the little wooden boy, and there's a little guy named Jiminy Cricket who is Pinocchio's conscience. So my classmate gave me a little Jiminy Cricket so I would have a conscience too. He thought I was a little calculating and callous at the time. Oh well. The examine. Praying the examine. I want to share this with you just so you can, if there's anything on the page you find helpful, please use it. And if it's not helpful, don't worry about it. But how can we be aware of God in our lives, especially when we're surrounded by jerks? This is written by a guy named Jim Manny. He writes, Ignatius of Loyola developed the examine as a way to find God in all things. You can find God in all things, even examinations. Even statistics class. Well, I'm not sure about it. Maybe not statistics. But in a lot of other classes, in ordinary things, in the parts of our lives we can find God. It says, it's a time set aside for thankful reflection on where God is in your everyday life. These steps, which most people take more or less in order, usually take 15 to 20 minutes a day. And if you don't have 15 to 20 minutes, take 5 to 10. Number one, ask God for light. Ask God for help. Ask God for direction. God, help me. It's a good prayer. Begin by asking for the grace to pray. Help me pray. Help me to see. Help me to understand. My own life. 2, give thanks. Look at your day in a spirit of gratitude. Everything is a gift from God. Go through the day, waking up in the morning, having breakfast or not having breakfast, first cup of coffee, third cup of coffee, conversation with friends, making it to class, great class, showed up on time, brilliant lecture, so glad to be there. Go through the day. Who have I talked to? Who have I seen? Sunset was wonderful. Rain came. Go through the day in specifics to be grateful for all kinds of things. Because everything is a gift from God. I got a ticket in Oakland at the Grand Lake Theater. Now, my suspicion is most of you haven't been over to Oakland very much. But should you come, there's a wonderful old movie house called the Grand Lake Theater. It's one of the 3 movie houses that has a Wurlitzer organ playing in it. The Grand Lake Theater, the Paramount Theater also in Oakland, and the Castro Theater in San Francisco. Big Wurlitzer organs. Can be fun. Right out in front of the Grand Lake Theater, it is possible to violate 18 to 25 traffic laws. Just because of the way it's organized, streets coming in, streets going out. And everybody knows this. It is a speed trap, and everybody knows this. But I got up early that morning, I had prayed, I had done a few things. I cleaned the cat box, I made coffee for the brothers, had a great cup of coffee, donated something here, helped out there. I was as good as Mother Teresa for about 3 hours in a row. Now, if I'm as good as Mother Teresa, surely I get a little leeway, right? So I'm in front of the Grand Lake Theater, and there's a double yellow line, and then there's an empty spot. Now, if you make a U-turn over a double yellow line, they'll hurt you. So, but if you go up to the no yellow line and make the U-turn, it's just fine. Well, I know that. I'm a grown-up. I've been driving for many years. But I have been extraordinarily good this morning. So I made a U-turn over the double yellow line, and within 9 seconds, the cop's behind me with the light. Now, to say I was furious is an understatement. And I'm not angry at the cop. It's me. You see the mental trick I did? I have been so wonderful, the laws of California shouldn't apply to me because of my wonderfulness. Now, I know you've never done that, and I'm sure that's never happened to a Dominican. It's probably a Jesuit problem. So anyway, but here's what I knew. I pulled up, he comes up, pulled down insurance, driver's license. This has happened to me before. Yeah, I knew I didn't even dare say good morning. Or, officer, what's wrong? I know what's wrong, and I am furious. And he comes, he's having a pretty good morning. He said, you know, if you had just gone a little further. Sign. And then he left, and I'm still furious. Now, I'm so angry I shouldn't drive. So I don't drive right away. Calmed down, went home, and then I called a couple of people and just reported on myself. This is what I set myself up, and there were consequences, and then I wondered if I should pay the fine or not. You pay the fine. It was very expensive. I have not done that since. Everything is a gift from God. Even that awful encounter with the officer. A gift from God. Because I got called on my crap. And that can be not my favorite gift, but it's a gift. Number 3, review the day. Guided by the Holy Spirit, look back on your day. Pay attention to your experience. Look for God in your day. Where have you had any sense of the presence of God? Number 4, look at what's wrong. Double yellow line. I think I could focus on that. Face up to failures and shortcomings. Ask forgiveness for your faults. Ask God to show you ways to improve. Number 5, look forward to the day to come. Where do you need God today? What can you do today? Be in the present. And I'm surrounded by stressed out, crazy people. Mom and dad are nuts. My sister's not talking to anyone. The examine looks for signs of God's presence in the events of the day. Lunch with a friend, a walk in the park, a kind word from a colleague, a challenge met, a duty discharged. The examine looks at your conscious experience. The ebb and flow of your moods and feelings are full of spiritual meaning. Nothing is so trivial that it's meaningless. And then it's fine to share that with somebody. You know, if you have someone who's a spiritual friend or a spiritual director or a person who's doing the same kind of thing, you can talk about it. And you can trust somebody. And you can have some feelings. That's all I know.